Okay, thank you very much, everyone who's preferred to join us rather than having an early lunch. My name is Anshel Pfeffer. I write for Haaretz. We just quieten down there at the back. Thank you. Once again, my name is Anshel Pfeffer. I write for Haaretz. The subject of the panel should be somewhere around here on one of the walls, but it's not up yet. So we're going to talk here about the role of religion in the conflict. Is it something which ensures the conflict will never be solved, or is it something which will perhaps give us an opportunity to solve some things? The original headline was, Jerusalem is burning. I've just come from Jerusalem as Rabbi Melchior and Yudith Oppenheimer. Jerusalem isn't quite burning yet, but it's a catchy headline which we hoped would draw some people into the panel. So excuses for the slight tabloid sensationalism in that headline. We really do have a stellar panel with us today. On my left-hand side, I'll start. I was always told that you have to start off with the rabbi, so luckily Rabbi Melchior is on my left-hand side. Rabbi Michael Melchior is my neighbor in Jerusalem, a former cabinet minister in Israeli governments, a rabbi both in Israel and for many years the chief rabbi of Norway. Today he is also the head of Mosaika, which is an Israeli NGO, which is doing many exciting and also quite a few secret things in the field of interfaith engagement. On his left, we have Ambassador Kurtzer, currently professor at Princeton of Middle East Studies and a former US ambassador to Egypt and Israel. I must add also he was the rabbi, cantor, and practically every other lay and religious function at Shaarei Shamayim Synagogue in Cairo when he was ambassador there. Yudith Oppenheimer is the CEO of Amim. For those of you who are not aware, Amim is an organization dedicated to promoting an agreed upon solution in Jerusalem. She's a long-time peace and feminist activist in Jerusalem and a PhD candidate at Bar-Ilan University. Her PhD will be about Zion Square, which I'm sure most of you are acquainted with, as a focal point of conflict and engagement in Jerusalem. And on the furthest left from me, I hope it's not politically as well, we have Professor Shaun Casey. And like Ambassador Kurtzer, he is currently officially an ambassador. He's the State Department's first special representative for religion and global affairs, which is a new role created by State Secretary John Kerry. He's an ethicist, a scholar of religion, and teaches at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington. Thank you all for being with us today. And we'll start off obviously with our question, which is religion. Religion. Is it something which can solve our problems, or will it continue muddling and ruining everything in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And we'll start off with Rabbi Melchior.
Well, everybody knows that religion can be the major source for unrest in the world. Just look at all the conflicts in the world today and you'll see that religion is either the main issue of conflict or one of the aspects in every single conflict in the world. So everybody knows that. And the fact that the issue of religion was put at the lunch hour of Haaretz also shows that Haaretz and New Israel Fund knows everything about this issue, because everybody goes to lunch, because we know all the answers of this. We go to lunch at this hour. So there's nothing really to debate about. The problem is, of course, that religion is there. God is there. And all of those who think not everybody reads Haaretz like I do, and we heard also the President of Israel, that religion is the biggest NGO in the world and has the biggest influence both on the Israeli and the Palestinian society. And the question is, do we need to go down the same path which has led us now for the last 25 years into one blind alley after the other? I think in the last round, we drove down the blind alley with four flat tires. Is that the only way which is possible? And that we take as an assumption that religion is on one side and peace, democracy, if we want to include other principles here, human right, human dignity, on the other side. Now, if that is the assumption of the people here in this conference and of the peace camp, then we're really in a bad situation. Then we will not succeed. Because if people really have the choice between following their identity, who they are, their belief, their loyalties, and going for peace, they will choose who they are and their identity and not choose peace. And all of those who preach, as I've seen several of those who are speaking today in many articles which I read with great interest in Haaretz, say, take God out of the equation. That's the only solution. All of those who preach that, the result is where we are today. Now, what I've set out to do, and with colleagues, both Jewish and Islamic colleagues, over the last years and more intensive, I'm just giving you the thesis, is to see if it's possible that religion can not only be the source of the problems, but can religion also be the path to the solution? And the good news, and I can only give you that for the headline now, but I hope that we can go in depth further down.
Carry on from the headline.
The good news is, and I give you many examples of practical results, but not only as a vision and as a theory, but we've created a coalition in Israel and Palestine and all over the Middle East, which is ready now to have a religious solution which will support and give the legitimization which has been lacking the whole time in the peace process, to bring inside the tent all those who have been excluded or have excluded themselves from the process up till now, and that will totally change the parameters of the possibilities of bringing a solution to the conflict, which seems to now that people are just despairing and nobody believes has any solutions.
Thank you, Rabbi Melchior, and we will proceed further beyond those headlines, and I'd like to turn now to Yudith Oppenheimer of Amim. Your organization, the organization which you head, has been monitoring a lot of the problems caused by the various religious groups, not just in Jerusalem, but at ground zero of the conflict on Temple Mount. And I think you'd like to perhaps tell us a bit about what your research and your impressions have been in the last year.
Thank you, Anshel. I would like to take from what you said, Rabbi Melchior, about religion being the biggest NGO in the world, but religion is also very much an issue of establishments and states, and establishments are very heavily invested in the issue of in religious issues. And if we talk about Temple Mount, which is the focal point, the center of the meeting, of the conflicting meeting point between state and religion, the state is heavily invested in the current changes, in the current events in Temple Mount. Now, it is well recognized that Temple Mount has been one of the main causes, events on Temple Mount, for the current clashes, for the current round of violence in Jerusalem. Now, I mean, it may not be the only reason, but it has been the iconic representation of the tensions in Jerusalem. What we have seen in the past few years in Jerusalem, and I may point out to a time, to the year 2013, in which temple movements and temple movements are vary in their issues and in their emphasizes, but what characterizes all of them is that all of them are unhappy with the current status quo on Temple Mount, and all of them have put on the agenda changing the current arrangement on Temple Mount. And to this end, they do not only advocate for that, but they penetrate deeply, and they have penetrated deeply into the Israeli establishment, having a very powerful patrons among Israeli politicians. To name few of them is Minister Uri Ariel, is Minister Miri Regev, and many others who advocates on a daily basis very, very strongly for the cause of the Temple movement. Their agenda may vary from giving prayer rights to Jews in Temple Mounts, to visiting, to expanding the visiting possibilities, to ascend for Jews to ascend the Mount, to changing the current status quo on the Mount, to building the temple in our days. And Minister Uri Ariel gave it 10 years for the rebuilding of the temple on Temple Mount and the destruction of the mosque. While they are varying from this, in their agenda, what unites them is their very intense attempt and advocacy to change the current status quo on Temple Mount. I may finish here and continue.
Carry on from here. Yudith just, I think one of the main things that I've taken from what you just said is the state being invested in this continuous religious conflict, and we know that Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that the state is not planning to change the status quo on the Mount, but the state is also not stopping, or has been slow to stop its representatives from going up. I mean, he did stop them from going, but some would say perhaps a bit too late. And I'd like to ask Professor Casey here, state, religion, you're the first representative, special representative on these matters in the State Department. Could you, first of all, very briefly give us a bit of background to your new role and why Secretary Kerry created this role, and perhaps a bit of how you see the State Department and diplomacy, the wider concept of diplomacy, playing a role in this conflict?
Thank you very much. Almost, not quite 3 years ago, Secretary Kerry asked me to come in and launch an office to sort of build an institution around an intuition that he had. And his intuition was that in terms of American diplomacy, we had not effectively engaged religious actors globally, nor had we assessed religious dynamics in context as effectively as we could. Across our almost 200 diplomatic posts, some, like Embassy Tel Aviv and our consulate in Jerusalem, obviously have a very granular understanding of the religious actors and dynamics, but that wasn't always true across the globe. He asked me to come in then and build an office to demonstrate the power of religion for good and for ill. So I think Rabbi Melchior has nailed it, that religion empirically can be a powerful force for good, but also a powerful force for chaos and
am I right in saying that you were appointed when ISIS was still the JV team?
This is before anyone knew who ISIL was. At that point, there was no Islamic State doing what it's doing. So this was early 2013. I would argue that events have proved his thesis since then.
No question about that.
So in the last 2 years, what we've done is we've built a team. We travel around the world. We try to model how to engage with religious actors from the local level all the way up to the national and regional level, but also then how to come into specific contexts and understand the religion dynamics, because you may understand Islam in Yemen, but you may not then understand it in Detroit, Michigan. So it's our argument that religion is always expressed in context and in very complicated ways. So we need people who have expertise in understanding religion depending on what part of the world you're looking at. I would simply say that Secretary Kerry has a thesis which I share, which I think, again, going back to what Rabbi Melchior said, is that in this particular case we're looking at, that religious actors have to be part of the solution. And to the extent they have not been viewed as a diplomatic resource, that has been unfortunate and perhaps has led to the lack of productivity in that space.
So we'll get back in a while and hear a bit about how you have been engaging over the last 3 years. Ambassador Kurtzer, you're sitting here and it's almost as if You've been in these same discussions, these same debates for how many years, talking about what religion has done to the region, and what mainly the harm it's done to the region, not so much good things it's been doing. Do you feel a bit of a deja vu sitting here today?
Look, I think what we've heard so far, even in the introductory remarks, is the difference between the what is and the what should be. Yudith demonstrated in her remarks what is, that religion has become a divisive, combative element, competition over access to holy space, competition over basic religious rights. Rabbi Melchior has talked about what should be, religion as potentially a unifying force between people. And this is what Shaun Casey works on every day, which is how do you integrate the what should be into diplomacy. I think the lack of specificity as we look at both conflicts and diplomacy and what it is that we're trying to analyze and resolve has created a tremendous amount of confusion on the issue of religion in a conflict situation, especially in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Because on the one hand, it is natural for people of different religions to bring their ideology, their thought systems, their identity into both conflict itself, but also conflict resolution processes. Rabbi Melchior is heavily involved in what we call in the trade people-to-people activities, dealing with his co-religionists, but also leaders of other religions, and trying to find common ground, to find even common ways of describing what the conflict is. And that, in fact, is, I think, the great challenge for us. Personally, I would argue that my own bias suggests that religion ought to be primarily confined to the private sphere, man's relationship to his God or her God, and man's relationship to fellow man based on ethical and moral principles derived from religion. And to the extent that religion gets brought into the public square, it ought to be seen as a bridge between people rather than a divisive element. And so would
your argument be that so far it's failed?
And so our religious leaders, in fact, have failed as much as the diplomats have failed, because they have tended to use religion as an additional tool to intensify conflict rather than to mediate differences between people. And when the diplomats then approach a conflict situation, as in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and try to deal with the hard issues of territory, the definition of peace, security, how two peoples can share a capital that both claim to be their exclusive right, in comes religion from the outside under current circumstances and exacerbates the problem rather than helping to resolve it. And I think that's our main challenge.
Thank you.
The difference between the what is and the what should be.
But I think that it's quite clear that you're saying if you would prefer religion to be on the sidelines and not be part of the diplomatic engagement and of the conflict resolution.
No, not at all. I think there is no way of keeping religion on the sidelines, and there's a role for religious leaders and people of religion to find ways to live with each other, maybe on the basis of common ethical and moral principles. In Judaism, for example, we tend to focus on chesed, emet, tzedek, shalom, good deeds, truth.
You mean one part of Judaism, not all the parts that we're engaging here with.
The basis for the ethical beliefs in Judaism rest on a number of very important pillars. And I don't think it takes a great deal of examination to see that the same exists in other religions. The question then is going to be whether religious leaders and diplomats can find a common language to translate the commonality of beliefs, both theological and interpersonal, into a conflict resolution process.
Thank you. Rabbi Melchior, Ambassador Kurtzer here is talking about chesed ve'emet ve'shalom, all the nice values of Judaism as the way I'm sure everybody in this room would like to see them in that way. But if we look at the rabbis who are today active in the field, in the conflict, that's not the message that most of them are putting forward. Not the rabbis that we're seeing nowadays in the West Bank, not the rabbis that we're seeing in today's rabbinate in Israel. So how can you argue that we need the rabbis and the religious figures from other religions, on the Muslim side, in our case mainly, to be more active when we see them mainly causing damage nowadays?
I think that the damage is there. We know that. We know why anybody who looks realistically to what's happened through these 25 years can easily analyze why the peace process didn't succeed. But everybody's just ignoring it. We're just looking the other way and saying, oh, but we'll go on in any case. So now we're talking about, controlling the process and not solving the, but we're just acting as if it doesn't exist. And what we set out to do was, let's try to see, is it possible that these same people, serious people, religious leaders, can be involved inside the camp, which they were not from the outset of before Oslo and so on. They were not ever invited inside the camp. Some of them were, because a lot of the people who were active on both sides, mostly on the Israeli side, but also on the Palestinian side, didn't want them inside the camp. And some excluded themselves. They were ideological. And it's true, it's difficult, because you have people who believe in Eretz Yisrael Shlema, the whole of Israel, and you have people who believe in the whole of the Waqf. If we want to, it's not symmetrical, but that the whole land belongs to Islam, the whole land belongs to the whole. And therefore it's easy, also you see the peace process as a secularizing process, and it's easy to exclude these elements. But nobody really tried to make a serious, there were some attempts to get some religious support for a peace process. The support of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef for the Oslo process at a certain stage had an importance. But there was no real attempt to religious involvement in the process. And we set out exactly to do that. Is it possible, both on a small stage and on a bigger stage, to do exactly that, to try a total different approach? We did it in small steps. Some of these things also now, when we did it now, we worked with, let's say, Yom Kippur Idul Adha. We're the only ones who talk to both sides. So the Jerusalem police, the municipality of Jerusalem are calling us before Yom Kippur Idul Adha, telling us everything is going to blow up, there's going to be blood running in the streets of Jerusalem for a religious holiday. You have to do something. Why? First you pyramids and you create fire, and then we have to come in and do something, extinguish the fire. So we start to deal with all the most radical leaders. The Jerusalemites are much more radical leaders than the king of Jordan and the PA. They're much more radical. And we sit with them and we talk with them, and they give out a fatwa which says that all the Muslims must respect the holiday of Yom Kippur. And the religious Jewish leaders come out with it, and we make YouTubes, and we use the social network, and so on. And these days become the most peaceful days, and so on. We're doing it now with Al-Aqsa. We took out Al-Aqsa of the equation now. Why? Not by doing big diplomatic steps, but by telling the Muslims through religious decisions done by the leading rabbis and sending it out in the network in Arabic now, and having meetings by all the leading rabbis and so on. I can't go in details what we've done, but we're taking it out of the equation, saying it's not permitted for Jews to go up on the Temple Mount. And if we have 50,000 rabbis in Israel, there may be 50 of them at all who permit to go up on the Temple Mount at all. But the Muslims don't know that, because they hear all the extremists.
But
so
you could argue that the Jews hear mainly hearing extremists as well.
Yes, because
we don't hear you as much as we hear other rabbis.
But we cultivated the press, our media, our social media. Every time there's an extremist who goes up in Al-Aqsa, an imam who goes up and say you have to kill all the Jews and so on, we make him the chief the chief preacher of Iran. He opens the news on Arutz 10 and Arutz 2 and the front page of Yudith.
But you could hardly argue that you and like-minded rabbis of you are the chief rabbis or the chief imams.
No, but we include in our work the people who don't agree with me. We are working with settler rabbis, we're working with the most influential rabbis. And what happens is, Anshel, what is happening now is that the radical Islamists, the people who belong to the Hamas, and even some of the people who belong to the jihad, when they hear that there's a possibility of making a religious peace which includes them, then they're willing to be part of the equation of the peace, and including a big part of the settler rabbis also, and the national religious rabbis. When they sit with the Islamists and on the 4 eyes and 6 eyes, and then bigger groups, and with the Islamic world, which we're now engaging with, the Islamic world, this is not something you read about in the newspapers today. The Islamic world wants today to distance itself from ISIS, and there are many amongst the political Islam, many who want to finish the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they will support the Hamas to take that step, but not in what is generally spoken also at this conference, that we need to cut a deal in order to bring the Hamas out.
Let's get back to that in a second. You deal with effective solutions every day. I mean, you obviously try and propose solutions every day. Go back into this focus of Temple Mount and of Jerusalem. Do you see any chance that the kind of solutions that Rabbi Melchior is suggesting here could be efficient in Jerusalem on a daily basis?
Thank you. I very much agree with Rabbi Melchior that an interface discussion is very, very, very essential to the political discussion as a whole. And unfortunately, I think we may have or we have a vision of religious as a private issue, but it is very much today engaged with the political issues. And I would like to say even something else. Today, the temple movement themselves, the very extremists, the very religious extremists, are using the language of private rights as a way to enhance their discussion. The very powerful success, part of the very powerful success on the public arena is that they are now using more and more the language, and it was a conscious decision on their part to use the language of prayer rights, of Jewish rights to the Mount, on Jewish religious rights to the Mount. And I know that this discourse has even is challenging even in the American Jewry, and I've often been asked, but what do you say about Jewish rights to pray on the Mount? What do you say about Jewish rights to ascend the Mount? And this, so on the one hand, they are the first one to connect religion and the state. On the other hand, they enhance their discourse by actually introducing in a very unilateral and one-sided way the language of rights. Of course, rights for them is our rights, is not defending other people's rights.
Thank you.
I would like to, one more thing, to go back to the story of Eid al-Adha and to complicate it a little bit more, and I'm risking now to the story of Eid al-Adha. Eid al-Adha, which conflated at the same time with Yom Kippur, and this discussion, who has the right to ascend the Mount on the holy places. Now, going back to Netanyahu's statement, Netanyahu, when he reaffirmed the status quo on the Mount after the eruption of the current cycle of violence. What he said as a way of calming down the situation, he reaffirmed the division between Muslim worshippers and Jewish visitors on the Mount as the very essence of the status quo. Now, how do you actually define in practice, how do you actually make it as a practice the difference between Muslim worshippers and Jewish visitors if at the time of Jewish high holidays, which happen to conflate at the time of of Muslim high holidays, Jews receive the visiting rights at the expense of enforcing collective entry restrictions on Palestinians. So who is the worshipper and who is the visitor? If Jews are the visitor, then they should be restrained instead of the Palestinian. So on the one hand, Netanyahu's statement was meant to calm things down, but in practice, what Palestinians experience in practice at that same day, that they were collectively restricted from ascending the mount in order to allow Jewish visitors to ascend the mount on that very high holidays of the two religions.
Is that the only thing where there is a gap between?
But I want to talk about that gap.
What he does?
But I want to talk
no,
about. I want to talk about. We're
that.
talking here not about politicians, more but about religious figures. And Professor Casey, when you look today as a scholar of religion, as a diplomat of religion, you look at the religious leaders we have today. So you have people like Pope Francis, who just broadcasting a message of peace and brotherhood, and the whole world can just get along and be friends and live in some wonderful paradise. And then you have, I think, what probably more common, or maybe Rabbi won't agree with me, but quite common religious leaders who exalt war. And we saw the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, the moment that the Russians deployed their aircraft in Syria, he immediately announced this is a holy war, and he visited the President Putin and blessed him and blessed the Russian soldiers and pilots going to war. So we see this kind of like, I mean, some of us may have thought this has disappeared from Christianity, or at least parts of Christianity. We see religious leaders blessing war and saying war is a wonderful thing and we should go forth to war and onward Christian soldiers. And we have the Pope, and we have rabbis saying these things, and we have, maybe the problem is that we don't really know what is a religious leader today and what religion, what message they should be broadcasting at all.
Well, that's a doctoral dissertation waiting to be written, so I'm going to
in 2 minutes.
I'm going to spare you that, right? Let me circle back to the confluence of the two religious observances, and where what happened there actually gives me great hope. If we assume in the long term there is a two-state solution, let's posit for the moment that is agreed to, then obviously what happens to the Temple Mount, the Haram al-Sharif, has to be part of that. But I think one of the things that I take great heart from in this example was that it was at the local and regional level that mayors and religious leaders came together and actually educated one another about the different ways the holidays were observed in a way that neither community really understood about the other. If there is going to be long-term peace in the space, people are going to have to live into that on a day-to-day basis. The day the ink is dry on the agreement does not end the discussion, does not end the hard work. I believe that it's exactly this kind of grassroots, interreligious conversation about real politics in real life. It's where the political will is going to come that will sustain a long-term political agreement. So in the meantime, while we don't have this active political process going on, there's still tremendous work to be done by religious communities at the high level, but also at the local level, to build the habits. Some of us as religious scholars talk about the virtues of how do we live with each other and learn from each other without the basic knowledge of the other faiths.
But you have so many religious leaders who don't want to learn the other faith. They're absolutists.
And
it's my faith, my truth, no one else's truth matters.
And
that seems to be to many the majority of religious leaders that have an influence today in the region.
That's why, at least on my limited perch, taking all the caveats of where I live, where I've been, where I have not been, I sense real energy among the three faiths in the region for this kind of increased conversation, both about what happens at the local level, but the implications of that for peace going forward. That is the diplomatic hope I see at the level of religious leaders on the ground. They're the ones who are going to have to invest the time and energy in overcoming any forces that would say, we don't talk, we don't interact, we have nothing but enmity. To me, that's the key, both how do you get to a peace agreement, but then how do you live into it and sustain it over a long arc of time?
Ambassador Kurtzer, in your many years as a diplomat in the region, have you seen encouraging instances of where religious leaders have managed to make a change and have pushed things forward, or would you say that our experience so far in the last couple of decades is not that encouraging?
Well, first of all, I would point to what Rabbi Melchior is actually doing as an encouraging sign. The conversations, the dialogue, the ongoing bridges that he is building with counterparts in Islam and Christianity are critically important. We've had a few other efforts over the years. And about 15 years ago in Alexandria, representatives of the three religions met, came up with a declaration, and it went nowhere. So it hasn't been a total void, but I think we are 100 years past the time when we should have started these people-to-people, religion-to-religion dialogues. In practical terms, however, the degree to which they can influence or impact or make an inroad into conflict resolution is going to be limited to how much political leaders believe that the people-to-people relationships have changed the overall meta issues. So that if a political leader believes that his or her base is essentially asking for a position that is exclusive of other religions, then the dialogues are not going to help. So we have to find a way not just to enhance the dialogues, such as Rabbi Melchior is conducting and others, but also to find a method to bring the results of those dialogues into the politics of resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict, so that when we get to troublesome issues, leaders believe that they will have the religious establishments in their respective countries behind them as they make temporal compromises.
So you're putting the onus on the politicians. Rabbi Melchior is blaming the media, you're blaming the politicians.
Well, I have a bias here as well, which is that ultimately peace is going to be between political entities. It will require religious buy-in, it will require religious support, but as well as Rabbi Melchior and his counterparts get along together, if political leaders don't buy into the idea that they can make the compromises on the ground with respect to territory, with respect to refugees, with respect to Jerusalem, if they don't believe that they can make those compromises and bring religious support behind them, it doesn't matter how successful Rabbi Melchior's dialogues will be. We need the politicians to understand that they have the support of their religious constituencies.
Who do you think is the key factor, or maybe one or two or three key factors in trying to calm things down in Jerusalem on a religious and also on a more wider society communal level around Temple Mount? And I think that we've seen in the last few weeks a calming down, but it may be very deceptive.
I think we need both politicians and rabbi, religious leaders and political leaders to reclaim the discourse on Temple Mount. Now, the problem with all these interfaith talk is most important, and maybe the future solution ideas would come from these discussions. I'm not sure that this is the first issue to be solved. This is it's like saying to the Palestinians, we're not solving territories, we're not moving
that was not my argument.
But here is the most sacred place. Let's talk about that. I think that we need to take a period, and I'm not exaggerating, of 100 years from now, not from now, from the time an agreement is reached before we touch the issue of Temple Mount. And Temple Mount has been for years, we have for years a symbol, not for years, for generations, a symbol of restraint, not only because of religious halacha laws about whether Jews are allowed to ascend the mount unpurified or etc. etc. It's not only these very specific issues about the law. It's an idea of restraint. It's a religious idea. It's a historical and religious idea of restraint that today has such poor PR that I think that we have to introduce back into our discussion and in our both political and religious discussion. If we do so, I think that we can gain something that our Judaism of today, the Judaism of conquering and of taking over, this can very much benefit from including again the idea of restraint into the discourse. Now, we definitely need politicians and religious leaders, but we need them. The issue is that the discussion that you are holding, and it's very much its nature, and it should continue like that, goes indoors. And I think that what we need today is politicians and religious leaders to take a stand, and to take a stand up loud, and to say it very much in the public, and to create a new discourse, to reclaim the discourse from the nationalist religious, and to reclaim again the symbol of the temple as a symbol of peace, not a symbol of conquest.
Thank you. Rabbi Melchior, I've been speaking to you for years. I mean, we've been having this conversation in different places, sometimes in print and sometimes at your house in Jerusalem, about the huge potential that you see for this kind of engagement that you're leading with other rabbis and other religious leaders from the Muslim side and from the Christian side. And I have yet to see, in all the reporting I've been doing in the last 20 years in Israel, in the territories, in Egypt and in Tunisia and in Turkey, a rabbi or an imam standing up at a scene of violence and trying to stop people from committing an act of violence. Now, I ask you, why can we have this conversation here in New York, and why can you have the conversations in various in Al-Azhar in Cairo and in various synagogues and yeshivas and churches and mosques and the homes of peoples in Israel and in Palestine, but we never see these people go out there on the front lines and stand in front of the people and say, guys, calm down, our religion should be a religion of peace, our religion should not exalt violence and hatred and killing. Where are all the rabbis and imams you're talking to when the killing actually begins, when the violence starts? Why are they never there on the front line?
Well, we're talking a different language. We're talking about different people. And you want me to summarize? We have to build up a whole new conscience with people who have been outside the camp of peace. Not the people who are preaching to the choir, who are always in the where we always quote the same people again and again and again. We like to be inside out. Like we always talk to the same people. This is much more difficult. The recent years, when we've been building up this, my theory has been for many years, I've been talking about this for 30 years, but now we've been building up, the last couple of years, we've been building up this coalition. These people are talking, you're just not listening. Because Anshel, with all due respect to you and to your newspaper and so on, you're not listening. When leading Islamists come, I'll give you an example. We had now, after this terrible murder of the Wapshe family, we made a big group, had a big group of, the rabbis called me. They said they wanted to do something to show their disgust, not just to protest this, but do something deeper. I said, I'll bring the Islamists together, but you have to be in this not just for the protest over the burning of the family. And some of the rabbis attacked the Islamists and said, every time we're the ones who protest, and then we don't hear your voices when the killing is the other way, like you're saying here now.
No, I didn't say we
don't. No, you're saying
both sides.
Yeah, you're saying both sides. But this is what the same thing. It was done. It was open for all the journalists to come. It was a big debate. All the journalists. One of the leading Islamists, he said, when 2 years ago we had an exactly equivalent episode, terrible crime in Itamar, the killing of the Vogel family, murder of small children, when terrorists went in Friday night and killed small children in their bed with their own hands.
The Vogel family.
The Vogel family, yeah, the Vogel family. And So the Islamists went out from the West Bank, people who belonged to the Hamas and leading Islamists, they went out. They called each other that day, and they came out with a statement which they published in all the Islamists on their headlines and so on, went out to the whole of the Muslim world. And they said the following. They said the following statement. They said at this meeting we had also there. They said, we should have had a Palestinian state many, many years ago. This is our justice. This is our right. But if this is the way to achieve a Palestinian state, there should go another 1,000 years, and we don't want a Palestinian state. This is not the way to achieve a Palestinian. And none of the journalists who were there, not one of them, nobody quoted it. Nobody quoted it 2 years ago. Nobody quoted it now, because these are the authentic. This is what's being taught now in Nablus. This is what's being taught. There are lots and lots of people. We like to say, oh, they're all Daesh, they're all Islamic State, they're all Islamists, they're all this. They're changing. Just a moment. These
time out.
Now the person.
But who is we are being attacked.
The person who wrote this, on this, he got the permission of all the heads of the Hamas to write this. Now this doesn't interest the public here. It doesn't interest because it doesn't interest when the rabbi we put on the stage of Haaretz in Tel Aviv, a settler rabbi, leading of the biggest settlement in Samaria, saying, I will make peace with the Islamists, political peace. We will make but that's a sensation. More than to hear Martin Indyk saying that he supports the Oslo Accords. Big deal. We all supported the Oslo Accords. Big deal. That's a big deal. That's a big deal to have the Islamists and these rabbis who have come a long way before they got there. And they come there because of the dialogue, because they are bringing with them big crowds now who are thinking. They have not given up their dream of a future. They've not given up that dream. They don't come from the place where you and I come from, but they're willing to make this historic compromise, which will make it possible to change the minds and make it possible for the politicians to do their job and make the political peace, which hasn't happened. We have to, at some stage, ask ourselves, why hasn't it happened for 25 years?
Yudith said 100 years. Can you just say in one sentence, how long do you think it's going to take? Because right now we're not seeing that happen. We're seeing more and more religious leaders inciting violence and inciting. And that's what we're seeing. That may not be the majority, but the fact is we're seeing. So you think it's happening right now?
I think it's happening now. Yes.
Ambassador Kurtzer, how long do you think it's going to take before religion can evolve and be a part of the solution?
Look, I respect that in your profession you want a date for when peace is going to happen.
Exactly.
Be patient. This conflict
100 years?
Anshel, please. This conflict has been going on for a long time.
For 120
years. Only recently have representatives of the three faiths begun to talk to each other in serious ways. Maybe the press has not picked up the story, maybe it has. If you want, I can mediate this after the session. I'll do a little diplomacy here. But this idea of when we're going to have peace or when the religious dialogue is going to conclude is not the right question. The right question is, how do we work in parallel when people of the cloth, when people of religion are starting to make progress in breaking down the barriers that used to divide them? How do we tie that in with the what we call the local problems and the local solutions? So Yudith spends her time working on the local issues, and I don't demean those local issues. Those are critically important, but they're never going to be resolved without this dialogue, and this dialogue is never going to have meaning unless it translates into the resolution of these issues. Time is not on our side, because the publicity given to the radicals and the ones who speak the loudest are providing an impression that radicalism is winning. And our job, whether we're in the business of religion, the business of conflict resolution, the business of diplomacy, is to push back against those radicals. It is not a question of deciding on a date, and it's not a question of deciding either or. We've got to do both.
Professor Casey, as an academic, and we'll try and end here with your observation on this, these processes in religion take centuries, perhaps millennia. Ambassador Kurtzer said now that time is not on our side. Do you see anything that could indicate that we may be able to push a bit faster this process?
So I'm not paid to make predictions. I'm paid to be hopeful day to day. If I had no hope that peace could not be discovered within a reasonable time frame, I would not be sitting here today. I would not be working in the State Department. I am both theologically, professionally, and diplomatically predisposed to always be hopeful. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you so much for ending this on a note of optimism. Thank you all for those who have been here instead of having your lunch early. Thank you very much. And now you can all go and have lunch.